It started on a quiet afternoon, the kind where the world feels a little slower, a little softer. Emma had just finished her morning coffee and was tidying up the kitchen when something outside the window caught her eye. At first, she thought it was just the wind moving the leaves, but as she looked closer, she saw a flash of red fur among the tall grass. A fox. Her heart skipped a beat. Foxes weren't an unusual sight in the area, but something about this one was different. It wasn't moving much. In fact, it looked like it was struggling. Emma wiped her hands on a dish towel and rushed outside, feeling a strange pull in her chest, a mix of concern and curiosity. As she stepped on her backyard porch, the scene became clearer. The fox was lying near the edge of her garden, its body curled slightly, its breathing uneven. Its fur was tangled with bits of dirt and leaves, and as Emma moved closer, she saw the problem. A deep cut along its back leg, fresh but not bleeding heavily. The poor thing must have been hurt for hours, maybe even since the night before. Emma hesitated. She knew wild animals could be unpredictable, especially when they were injured. But looking into the fox's eyes, wide, golden, and filled with something that almost resembled trust, she felt a strange sense of connection. It wasn't just an animal lying there. It was a living, breathing creature in need of help. She crouched slowly, keeping her voice soft and steady. "Hey there. It's okay. I won't hurt you." The fox flicked its ears but didn't move away. That was a good sign, right? Emma's mind raced with what to do next. Calling animal control felt like the obvious choice, but something held her back. Would they just take the fox away? Would it even survive the stress of being captured? She had no idea how these things worked, but she did know one thing. She couldn't just walk away. She needed a plan. Carefully, she inched a little closer, watching for any signs of distress. The fox remained still, its sides rising and falling with each breath. Emma could see it now, the exhaustion in its body, the way its muscles twitched slightly from pain. "What happened to you?" She wondered. Was it hit by a car? Attacked by another animal? Lost and alone? She swallowed hard, her heart pounding as she made a decision. Maybe she couldn't save every injured animal in the world, but she could help this one. Taking a deep breath, she slowly reached out her hand, letting the fox catch her scent. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. And then, something incredible happened. Emma held her breath as the fox sniffed the air cautiously. It didn't recoil, didn't try to escape. It just lay there, watching her with tired, wary eyes. A part of her was relieved. It meant the fox wasn't in a state of complete panic. But another part of her felt a deeper sadness. Wild animals were supposed to run. They were supposed to be strong and free. But this one was too weak to move. Her fingers hovered just inches from its fur, and she could feel the warmth of its body, the slight rise and fall of its breathing. Slowly, she pulled her hand back. She needed to think. This wasn't like rescuing a lost dog or helping an abandoned kitten. This was a wild animal, and she had no idea what she was doing. She reached for her phone, hesitating before unlocking the screen. Should she call someone? Would a wildlife rescue center even be able to help? And if they did, what would happen to the fox? Her gut told her that once it was taken away, she might never know its fate. Emma glanced back down at the animal. Its eyes were half closed now, its ears twitching slightly, as if listening to the sounds of the world beyond her yard. Birds chirped in the trees. A light breeze rustled the grass. Somewhere in the distance, a car passed on the road, but here, in this moment, it was just the two of them. She couldn't ignore the feeling deep inside her, the one that whispered, "This fox came to you for a reason." Taking a slow breath, Emma stood up and hurried back inside. Her mind was already racing with possibilities. She didn't have medical training, but she did have a small first aid kit. Would that even help? Could she clean the wound without making things worse? She quickly grabbed what she could, some gauze, a bowl of water, an old towel, and rushed back outside. The fox hadn't moved. Emma knelt beside it again, laying the towel gently near its body. She had no idea if the fox would let her help, but she had to try. As carefully as she could, she dipped the gauze into the water and reached toward its injured leg. The moment the damp cloth touched the wound, the fox flinched, letting out a low, warning growl. Emma pulled back immediately, her heart pounding. She wasn't scared, exactly, just painfully aware of how fragile this moment was. If she pushed too hard, the fox might panic, might try to run despite its injury. But if she did nothing, the wound could get worse. "Shoo," she murmured, keeping her voice soft and steady. "I know it hurts. I just want to help." The fox's eyes flickered open fully again, watching her carefully. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, as if understanding something unspoken, the fox let out a slow breath and rested its head back down. Emma took that as a sign to keep going. She worked gently, dabbing at the wound with slow, careful movements. The cut was deep, but it wasn't fresh enough to still be bleeding heavily. That was a good thing, right? She wasn't sure. What she was sure of was that this fox had been suffering for a while. Her thoughts drifted as she worked. How had this happened? Had it been attacked by another animal? Had it gotten tangled in something? The possibilities swirled in her mind, each one more unsettling than the last. Minutes passed, but Emma barely noticed. Her focus was on the fox, on the rhythmic sound of its breathing, on the fragile trust forming between them. She was so deep in concentration that she almost didn't hear it, the faint sound of movement just beyond her yard, a rustling in the trees, a presence just out of sight. Emma's head snapped up, her body tensing. Was someone there? She scanned the tree line, her pulse quickening. Nothing, but the feeling remained, like unseen eyes watching her from the shadows. The fox's ears twitched, but it didn't react beyond that. Maybe it was just another animal. A deer, a rabbit, something harmless. But Emma couldn't shake the unease creeping over her skin. Trying to push the thought aside, she returned her attention to the fox. The wound was as clean as she could manage, but it still needed more care than she could provide. She needed a real plan. Carefully, she adjusted the towel beneath the fox, trying to make it more comfortable. "I don't know what to do next," she admitted softly. "But I promise I won't leave you." The fox didn't respond, of course, but somehow she felt like it understood. The late afternoon sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over the backyard. Emma knew she couldn't stay out here forever, but the idea of leaving the fox alone felt wrong. She reached for her phone again, hesitating over the screen. Should she call a rescue center? A vet? A friend? She had always been independent, always handled things on her own. But this was different. Her thumb hovered over the call button. And then another sound. This time, it was closer. A soft crunch of leaves. A subtle shift in the air. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she turned her head toward the trees again. The shadows seemed darker now, stretching longer as the sun lowered. The uneasy feeling returned, stronger this time. She wasn't imagining it. Something or someone was out there, and whatever it was watching them. Emma's fingers tightened around her phone, but she didn't make the call. Instead, she listened. The air was still except for the faint rustling in the distance. It wasn't just the wind. She knew the difference. Something or someone was nearby. Her eyes darted back to the fox. It had lifted its head slightly, ears pricked forward, alert. It sensed it too. Emma's heart pounded. Was it another animal? A predator? Or something else? A part of her wanted to run back inside, shut the door, and pretend she hadn't felt that creeping sensation slithering up her spine. But she couldn't. Not with the fox lying there, injured and vulnerable. She wasn't about to abandon it now. Swallowing hard, she forced herself to stand. Her legs felt unsteady, but she took a slow step forward toward the tree line. "Hello," she called out, her voice firm but cautious. Silence. The birds had gone quiet. Even the wind had settled, as if holding its breath. Emma took another step. The grass crunched beneath her shoes. A bead of sweat slipped down the back of her neck. She told herself she was being paranoid, that her mind was playing tricks on her. But then, a branch snapped. She flinched, her pulse racing. The sound came from just beyond the trees, too close to ignore. And then, movement, just a flicker of motion in the shadows, too quick to make out. "Who's there?" Emma called again, her voice sharper this time. Nothing. And then, as if the silence had never existed, the birds resumed their songs. The breeze picked up again, rustling through the leaves. Everything seemed normal, almost as if whatever had been there had vanished. Emma's throat was dry. She scanned the trees one last time before backing away, her hands trembling. She didn't know what she had expected. An answer? A figure stepping out from the shadows? Whatever it was gone now. She turned back to the fox. It was watching her, its golden eyes unblinking. For a brief second, Emma wondered if the fox knew more than she did, if it had sensed whatever had been out there before she had. Shaking off the thought, she crouched down beside it again. "We need to get you somewhere safe," she murmured. She had been stalling, hoping the fox would gather enough strength to move on its own. But she could see now that wasn't going to happen. Carefully, she reached for the towel beneath it, folding the fabric gently around its body. The fox tensed, but didn't resist. Emma lifted it slowly, cradling it against her chest. The warmth of its body seeped through the fabric, and she could feel the soft, rapid rhythm of its heartbeat. She carried it inside, kicking the door shut behind her. The air inside her house felt different, safer, quieter. But the unease in her chest hadn't faded. She placed the fox on a thick blanket near the fireplace, making sure it was as comfortable as possible. The little creature let out a small, tired sigh and curled its tail around its body. Emma exhaled, running a hand through her hair. She still didn't know what she was doing, but at least now she could think. She grabbed her laptop and sat on the floor beside the fox, quickly typing into the search bar. What to do if you find an injured fox. A list of articles popped up. Some recommended calling wildlife rescue immediately. Others said to leave the animal alone unless it was in immediate danger. One mentioned a phenomenon she had never heard of before: foxes forming bonds with humans under rare circumstances. Emma frowned. That wasn't possible, was it? She glanced at the fox, its body rising and falling in slow, steady breaths. She had always thought of wild animals as untouchable, distant. But this one had let her help. It hadn't fought her. It hadn't tried to run. The thought sent a shiver through her. She kept scrolling, reading everything she could about fox behavior, injuries, and care. She wasn't an expert, but she knew one thing. If she was going to help, she needed to do it right. Hours passed, and the sky outside darkened. Emma kept an ear tuned to the world beyond her walls, but the strange feeling from earlier never returned. Maybe she had imagined it. Maybe the stress of the day had gotten to her. But deep down, she wasn't so sure. As night settled in, she grabbed a pillow and a blanket and lay down near the fox. She couldn't explain it, but she didn't want to leave it alone. Its golden eyes flickered open for just a second, meeting hers. Something unspoken passed between them. Then slowly, the fox closed its eyes again, its body relaxing. Emma stared at the ceiling, sleep tugging at her. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But one thing was certain: this wasn't just an ordinary night. And this fox wasn't just any ordinary animal. Emma woke with a start. The room was dark except for the soft glow of the fireplace, casting flickering shadows across the walls. For a moment, she wasn't sure what had woken her, but then she heard it, soft, almost imperceptible. A noise from outside. She pushed herself up, heart pounding. The fox was still curled on the blanket, its breathing slow and even. It hadn't moved, but something felt off. The air was different, heavy. Emma strained to listen. The night was quiet, too quiet. No wind, no rustling leaves, not even the distant hum of passing cars. Just silence. She stood slowly, careful not to disturb the fox, and moved toward the window. Pressing her fingers against the cold glass, she peered out into the darkness. Her backyard stretched into the shadows, the tree line barely visible under the faint moonlight. Then movement. Her breath hitched. There, just at the edge of the trees, a figure. She couldn't make out any details, only a shape, tall, unmoving. Watching. Emma's pulse pounded in her ears. Was it an animal? A person? She blinked, her mind racing through possibilities. But before she could react, the figure shifted and, just as quickly as it had appeared, melted back into the trees. She swallowed hard, her body frozen in place. Had she really seen that? Or was she just exhausted, her mind playing tricks on her? No, someone or something had been there. Her instinct screamed to her to lock the doors, to call someone. But who? The police? What would she even say? That she thought she saw someone standing in the woods? It wasn't illegal to be outside. And what if it was nothing? But deep down, she knew it wasn't nothing. Slowly, she backed away from the window. The fox stirred slightly, but didn't wake. Emma grabbed her phone, fingers shaking as she checked the time. 2:37 a.m. She hesitated, then opened her camera and took a picture of the backyard. Maybe in the morning, she'd see if there was anything there. Tracks, broken branches, anything to prove she wasn't losing her mind. She locked the doors, double-checking them twice, then sat on the floor beside the fox. It was still warm, still breathing softly, its golden fur glowing in the firelight. Looking at it somehow made her feel safer, like she wasn't alone in whatever this was. She forced herself to breathe, to stay calm. Maybe it had just been an animal passing through. Maybe she'd imagined the figure. Maybe. But as she sat there, staring into the fire, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. And she had a terrible suspicion that this wasn't over. Emma barely slept the rest of the night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that shadowy figure standing at the tree line, unmoving, watching. She listened for sounds, footsteps, rustling, anything, but the night remained eerily silent. The fox, curled up beside her, barely stirred. Somehow, its presence kept her grounded, kept her from letting fear take over completely. When the first light of dawn seeped through the curtains, Emma finally exhaled the breath she didn't realize she had been holding. The world outside no longer felt as threatening, but the unease still clung to her. She stood slowly, her muscles stiff and stretched before carefully checking the fox. It blinked up at her sleepily, its golden eyes a little brighter than the night before. That was a good sign. She moved to the window, heart hammering as she pulled back the curtain. The backyard looked the same as always, peaceful, undisturbed. No sign of anything unusual. But that didn't erase what she had seen. She grabbed her phone, pulling up the picture she had taken in the middle of the night. She squinted, zooming in, her stomach twisting. There, faint, barely visible among the trees, was a dark silhouette. Emma's fingers tightened around her phone. She hadn't imagined it. Someone had been there. She forced herself to take a deep breath. Panicking wouldn't help. She needed to think. Her first instinct was to check outside. She pulled on a jacket and stepped onto the back porch, her breath visible in the crisp morning air. The yard was still, bathed in soft golden light. She hesitated before stepping onto the grass, scanning the ground carefully. Then she saw them, faint footprints leading from the trees toward her house. They weren't hers. A shiver ran down her spine. Someone had been watching. But why? And who? She crouched near the tracks, her mind racing. They didn't look fresh, which meant whoever it was had been there hours ago. But what did they want? Had they been watching her? The fox? The idea sent a chill through her. She needed answers. Pulling out her phone, she took pictures of the footprints, then straightened and scanned the tree line one last time before heading back inside. The fox lifted its head as she stepped in, watching her. "I think we're in the middle of something bigger than we realize," she murmured, sitting beside it. The fox blinked, as if it understood. Emma spent the next few hours researching, reading everything she could about foxes, their behavior, and, more importantly, why someone might be interested in one. She learned that in some cultures, foxes were seen as mystical creatures, symbols of luck or messengers of something greater. Some believed that if a fox crossed your path, it meant something significant was coming. That thought stuck with her. She glanced at the fox. Was it a coincidence that she had found it? That it had let her help? That, in the middle of the night, when the world felt eerily quiet, something had been watching them? She didn't believe in fate, but she couldn't ignore the feeling in her gut. This wasn't random. By midday, she made a decision. She couldn't keep the fox forever, but she wouldn't just hand it over to anyone, either. It needed real help, the kind that only a wildlife expert could give. After a few phone calls, she found a local rescue that specialized in rehabilitating injured wild animals. They agreed to send someone over to assess the fox's condition. When a knock came at the door an hour later, Emma felt another wave of unease. She peered through the peephole, half expecting to see something or someone unnerving. But it was just an older man in a warm jacket, holding a small medical bag. "Emma," he asked when she opened the door. "I'm Dr. Reynolds. You called about an injured fox." She nodded and stepped aside, leading him to where the fox lay. Dr. Reynolds knelt beside it, his movements careful and practiced. The fox tensed slightly, but didn't resist as he examined its leg. "You did a good job keeping the wound clean," he said. "It's healing, but it'll take some time. We can take it to the rescue center, monitor its progress, and once it's strong enough, we'll release it back into the wild." Emma felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. She had known this moment was coming, but now that it was here, she wasn't ready. "Will it be okay?" she asked softly. Dr. Reynolds gave a reassuring nod. "Foxes are resilient. It has a good chance." She hesitated before speaking again. "Do you know if foxes ever bond with people?" The man studied her for a moment. "It's rare, but not impossible," he admitted. "Sometimes, when an animal is in distress, it recognizes kindness. But wild creatures belong in the wild. The best thing you can do is let it go when the time comes." Emma swallowed past the lump in her throat. She knew he was right. Dr. Reynolds carefully lifted the fox, wrapping it in a soft blanket. Emma followed him to his vehicle, watching as he secured the fox safely inside. Before he closed the door, the fox turned its head and met her eyes. Emma's breath caught. She wasn't imagining it. There was something there, a silent understanding, a moment of connection. Then the door shut, and just like that, the fox was gone. Emma stood in her driveway long after the car disappeared down the road. The weight in her chest felt heavier than she expected. That night, she sat by the fireplace, staring at the empty blanket where the fox had once curled up. The house felt different, quieter. But something else had changed, too. She didn't feel afraid anymore. She still didn't know who had been in the woods that night or why. Maybe she never would. But she had the distinct feeling that whatever had happened, it wasn't just about the fox. It was about her. Something had shifted inside her, an awareness, a realization. She had always seen the world one way, practical and logical. But now, she wasn't so sure. Maybe there was more. More to the way things connected. More to the way moments found us when we needed them most. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing. She would never forget the night an injured fox came in her life. And she would never stop wondering what it had meant.